Welcome to Season 7 of Be a Baller, the podcast where success isn't the goal, legacy is. This season is all about intentional living, leading with purpose, serving with faith, and leaving a mark that outlives us. We go beyond the highlights, bringing you real conversations with legacy builders from ministry, business, sports, education, and community. Leaders committed to the Wisdom Pledge, paying it forward to the next generation. If you're ready for faith-filled leadership and practical wisdom to live on purpose and finish strong, let's be a baller, legacy style.
Welcome to Be a Baller podcast, where we talk about faith, leadership, and how to win in life the right way. Today's episode is brought to you by First Merchant Bank, helping you prosper. This is Father's Month, and we're leaning into something powerful, pass the torch, generational legacy, because real success is not just what we achieve, it's what we pass on to today, what we pass on. Today's conversation is special. We're joined by father and son, whose lives and leadership have helped shape the city of Columbus and beyond. Ralph Smithers Sr., a trailblazer in urban development and public service, who broke barriers as the first African-American development director for the city of Columbus, and has spent decades pouring into community, leadership, and legacy. We're joined by his son, who picked up that torch, Ralph Smithers Jr., a leader in inclusion, belonging, and community impact at Encova Insurance, brings a heart for people and passion for building environments where others can thrive. This conversation today is to be a masterclass on what it means to build something that outlives you. So let's get started, gentlemen. Let's go.
Do it.
Welcome to Be a Baller podcast. I'm sitting here with two real ballers.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, with two real ballers. Well, as we talk about this whole idea came about when I began thinking about how we had to pass that torch to the next generation. And particularly we as men, we can't drop the baton. We have to make sure we get it to the next generation. And then we can begin building that generational legacy. So the first question for both of you guys, when you hear the phrase pass the torch, what does that mean to you personally?
Well, passing the torch is going to involve taking those things that you were taught as a youngster, the things that came from your dad or your grandparents, and even beyond that, and being able to hold, nourish that, expand upon it, and move forward in a positive way.
Yeah, it's hard to follow that, but, in track, the most important thing is to pass the torch and not drop it, because if you drop it, you're disqualified. So there's a lot of responsibility that goes along with that. So I think it's not only important to make sure you're in the right lane to call the person to receive it, but also if you're receiving the torch or the baton, to be able to do it, not drop it on the ground, and either go win the race or stay in the race.
That's good. That's good. Brother Smithers Sr., what does a meaningful legacy look like beyond all these titles and accomplishments? Because you've accomplished a lot in your lifetime. What does a meaningful legacy look like?
Well, I've read a lot of different definitions to what legacy is what the word legacy means. And I know to me it might mean a little different than it does from somebody else. I think I mentioned to you that a lot of people consider whatever they find in their obituary as their legacy, or whatever they find in their resume is their legacy. But I don't equate the two. For instance, when you talk with me, I've got a resume, but I don't consider the resume really my legacy. It's something that I did, but my life and what I leave behind, what people think about me, when I'm gone, to me, that's the legacy. What I passed on to my kids, what I gathered from my parents and my parents before the parents before them. To me, that's what establishes your legacy as a person, not as what jobs you held or what you did in your life. A lot of people will consider legacy. There's one person now in the national news that wants to build monuments. A monument is a monument. That's not a legacy. The family would talk about the legacy in private. But the legacy of those physical things are not necessarily what I consider to be part of a true legacy.
Brother Ralph, when you think about your dad, things he's accomplished and awards and titles, give me some insight on that, on what that legacy of your dad really means.
Well, the first thing is it's huge shoes to follow. And in a lot of respects, if I wanted to look at it a certain way, it could be pressure. We're not in competition or anything like that. But I guess, when I think about legacy, I just think, wow, I can't mess this up. I got to make sure that, especially since we share a name, I can't mess it up. I've got to be accountable because, I could easily destroy his legacy, and doing the wrong thing. So there is pressure involved, but it also is something that creates a lot of motivation to, really keep things going and, just try to do the best I can at whatever I'm called to do.
As a pioneer in your field, what were some defining moments that shaped your leadership journey?
Well, first I should say this. My field was not one that I planned. It just happened. I started out, my dad was in construction. He was a laborer. He did plastering, did concrete work. So I wanted to go into something that had to do with building. So quite frankly, I went to the downtown YMCA, spoke to a guy by the name of Nelson Newsom, Claude Willis. These were guys that gave young guys like myself a little directions to where we might go if we planned to go to college. Well, when I went to college, my brother was a year ahead of me. He decided to be a civil engineer. So I may as well go into civil engineering too. Well, it took 2 years before me to come to the decision that wasn't really what I was cut out to be. But the architecture was in the engineering college, and it was quite frankly easier to transfer from civil engineering over to architecture, and I did that. And then, quite frankly, I couldn't find a job in an architect's office. My idols were a guy by the name of Sil Angel, architect here in Columbus. He and I talked a lot about the profession. I went to his office to get a job, and he said, "Ralph, I can't afford you." Well, at any rate, after enrolling in the school, I couldn't find a job. I ended up working at Kroger Greenway off in Mount Vernon Avenue. The person out there, the manager, tried to get me to drop out of school and to go into Kroger management. I didn't do that. Stayed in architecture, got a job as a student assistant in the School of Architecture. Knew nothing about city planning. But one of the professors came around, in the summertime, it was just me and the professors in the building. So one of the professors came around, I'm looking at literature, and I had asked him some questions about city planning. He said, well, go down and talk to this guy by the name of Harold Buchanan. He'll give you some insights what city planning is all about. Only to find out what planning was, I scheduled an appointment to see Harold Buchanan. And after the interview, after he discussed what planning was all about, he said, do you want a job? I didn't go down there to get a job. I went down there to find what the profession was all about. Well, to make a long story short, I took the job, and things went on from there. That's why I like to say that almost every decision in my life was not necessarily something I had planned. It was God's decision, not mine. That's how I got in the profession. Graduated in architecture. Couldn't find a job in city planning. But I stayed where I was and was able to move up through the ranks at the Department of Development at that time, and got a lot of experience. Again, things that I had not planned. It just happened. God's plan, not mine.
Ralph Sr., what did you intentionally want to pass down to your children that couldn't be found in the classroom?
Well, this will go back to faith. Work hard. Keep your nose clean. I was raised in Mount Vernon AME Church. Spent the first 21 years of my life there. Then after I got married, I went to St. Paul. I hope the kids continue in the line of faith. I took a course in religion in Ohio State amongst the planning and engineering courses. And one of the questions on the final exam was, can you prove the existence of God? My answer was no. It all comes through faith. I ended up getting an A on that. Didn't do so well during the quarter, but I got an A on that on the final exam. So, those are the kind of things that I want to really instill in the kids so that they can understand what faith is all about, work hard, and don't be discouraged.
Speaking of that, being involved in having a career, community leadership, how did you balance that and being present, to be present as a father, balancing all those things?
Balance it with my regular, with my
regular
private
job,
life.
career.
Well, the family life always came first. So there wasn't much of a balance. I mean, a balance might imply that things are kept in equal status. But I never worried about that. My concern was always the family. One other story I've got to tell you, how your career and your life is not always. When I started to Ohio State, we all go up there for orientation. The very first day in orientation, there was a young lady that was standing in front of me. Very first person I met. We got serious. We started dating. After we dated a while, we started talking about family. And it turned out that her family and my family grew up together in Renville, Ohio. That's more than a coincidence that something like that would happen. That you end up marrying somebody that your parents knew, but you had no idea they were even around. But that shows that you have to, at some time, say that your life is in somebody else's hands, not yours.
Lastly, for this session, looking back, what makes you the most proud, not professionally, but personally as a father?
Well, 3 kids that are kept in mind the things I hope I ingrained in them. That is, keep your nose clean, work hard. 3 kids, 2 in business, 1 in early childhood development. All 3 doing well. I've got 5 grandkids now. They're on a good path to do well also. Again, I just want to make certain that they not only know what their dad and their granddad did, but they know what else happened in their family to get them to where they are. And we talked about the family pictures that I have here. And to me, you have to understand that as we look at the family tree, if you take one of the persons out 4 or 5 generations ago, it changes everything. So from my standpoint, you do a good job, you pass that on to your kids, and hope they pass that on to their kids and so on. So that's legacy to me. When you've got this entire family history, knowing that each one of them is contributing to you, and you're contributing to all those that...
You done had us in here dropping the mic already. We just getting started. Ralph Jr., growing up, when did you first realize the impact of your father's work and leadership?
That's a great question, because when I was in the house and my dad was working, I didn't really have any idea what he was doing. It was very abstract. The biggest thing I remember from my childhood watching my dad was he was never home on Monday nights. And, what's going on? He was down at the city council meeting, because if you're the city planner, you have to, get all the rezonings and all that, through. So, but I still didn't understand any of it. And and I also, this is kind of funny. I always thought that he talked differently. He had a different, his speaking voice was always a lot dramatically different when he was, doing this public speaking versus how it was in the house. So I thought that was kind of strange. And, it really, I probably really had to come into my adult sensibilities to really fully understand that, because obviously from that point of view, I'm dealing with a very limited set of data and limited set of information. But, I noticed that, as things went along and some of the experiences and opportunities I had, growing up, some of the places we got to go when you're, either working for the city of Columbus or Chamber of Commerce, sometimes you get a good seat somewhere, or you get into one place, through a door perks, that you didn't even know existed.
Perks. Some perks.
There were some perks. And, that's when it really started to kick in. And then even now, some of the things that I'm involved with cross into some of the lanes that my dad, we had different career paths, different industries, but I cross into some of the lanes that he was in, and I have people ask me about them, and then that's when it really starts to hit. So it's been an evolution.
Ralph Jr., what are some values your father modeled that you now carry into your leadership at Encova?
That's a great, all of your questions are great. And I have to make sure I don't keep repeating that every time because I just love the insight in your questions. But I think that first one is just common sense. Common sense isn't common, but, just the ability to listen, to not carry a predetermined outcome into any, keep an open mind. That's one thing I appreciate the most about my upbringing is just that I believe I was raised to have an open mind and think for myself. And a lot of times when you come into different situations, people bring biases in to conversations that undermine their ability to get to a really true, genuine, best solution. So I think, keeping an open mind, being compassionate, learning how to ask questions. Part of avoiding prejudgment is not to be quick to anger, to give people room to speak and to be heard. And I could go on, but those are the ones that are top of mind.
Speaking of that, in what ways are you building on the foundation that your dad laid, and where are you called to lead differently? Because sometimes he had a path, but there's a foundation that was laid.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's an incredible legacy, and it could be a big weight in a lot of respects. So to answer your question with respect to how things are different, when I grew up, I think a lot of the lessons that I learned and were taught were not just exclusively in our household. I think I had all of my first cousins either in Columbus or not too far from Columbus. They were all accessible, and even to the point when I started at Ohio State, I think I had at least 5 cousins that were there with me that I would see on a daily basis. So it was like a family reunion all the time. So I had my grandparents around, had my cousins, had my aunts and uncles. So those lessons were, reinforced, and I was able to kind of learn from that extended family as much as I was just from our household. Where it's different is I think I did a count because of how many first cousins once removed. I mean, it's over 10. Where it's different is my kids don't have that. They have 2 younger cousins that have always lived out of state that are significantly younger, maybe 10 or 15 years younger. They have a few cousins that are on the opposite end of town from where you are. And actually one, my twins have a cousin that is their age, but their other cousins older. So they didn't have as large of a family unit to connect. And as my dad referenced, both sides of our family are from the same part of the world, so our families really got along well. And as such, my cousins on my mom's side are just as, they're just as close as my cousins on my dad's side. I mean, we all know each other, so that's the biggest difference. So my kids have had to lean into more of their closest, longest friends or kids that, they went to school with or played ball with or what have you. And, obviously when that happens, I think we learn a lot from the people around us. So it's a little bit different. It's a little different to get that message out. And, perhaps some of the other things that are different, with social media and access to information, I can do all that I can do as a parent, but I can't always compete with all the other messages out there. So we just have to adapt and just do the best we can to help them get where we want them to be. And so far they're doing that.
Finally, Raph Jr., now that you're a dad, what does it mean to you to pass the torch?
Well, again, it's a huge responsibility to pass the torch. And, what it means to me is that in the same thing that I spoke about earlier, it's if you're in track and you have the baton, you have to do your right things to get the baton to the next person, and that's been accomplished. Now it's my turn. And, the goal is to, obviously not drop the baton. You want to not be the part of the leg that loses the race. You want to make sure that, in a track scenario, when you pass the baton, both teammates are running at full speed. So you have to achieve that. And then you have to adapt the circumstances to the present environment, which is different. Although I will say that, I did have a chance to coach my sons, particularly when they were young football players. And one thing I learned about that experience is regardless of the generation, they're still human and they still want to be heard. They appreciate coaching and direction if they know that it comes from a place of concern for their well-being, and they like to win. And if we can all kind of, be on sync with that, I might have to communicate it and act in a different way than what was presented to me. But good Lord willing, the story's still being written, will be successful.
If I can tack on to that, I've got one comment. Things have changed so much between his generation, even my generation. A lot of our family being together, we went to church together, we picnicked together, we had reunions together, went to Renville together, things like that. The society today is open. It wasn't open then. So we had to do things, being people of color, that didn't allow us to mix like is available today. One grandkids, now I got 3 of the grandkids, or 2 grandkids live out of Columbus, moving around. One of them moves around quite a bit with their dad. Well, that opportunity simply was not there during my generation. Even moving around in the city of Columbus was not that easy during my time. But so things have changed. As I hear Ralph Jr. talk, passing the baton, you may pass it on to somebody that has been brought up in a certain way, but through no fault of their own, they might drop the baton. But I think we have to understand why that might happen, and still deal with that person to get them back on the track.
Ralph Sr., can you share a moment when your relationship shifted from father son to mutual respect as men and leaders?
When did that happen?
Yeah, when did that happen?
Still happening.
Okay.
Well, first, with 2 sons and 1 daughter, they have gone in different directions. Their personalities have always been different. Ralph has always been outgoing. Ralph Jr. has always been outgoing, whereas the other 2 might be more to themselves. The daughter kind of took after their mother. She's a teacher now in Wyland Park here in Columbus. The other son is, I call him the wanderer. He's in marketing. He follows his career. My interest during my day was not necessarily to follow a career, but to try to stay in Columbus. When I left the city of Columbus, I had some good job opportunities outside of Columbus. But I remember telling somebody, I think I'd rather be a bus driver in Columbus than be another development director in Hanford, Connecticut, or someplace like that. So things have changed.
When you think about those conversations that you guys have had, and what are some of those you wish more families had about legacy, responsibility, and faith?
Repeat that again, please.
Some of those conversations that you guys have had in your family, what are some of those things you wish more families would have about legacy, responsibility, and faith?
Well, faith is the top of the list, of course. And you can understand things are different. In school, from a faith standpoint, I think in our fraternity, we visited different churches, different denominations. I've been everything from the storefront church to the big cathedrals in Chicago. But your faith really shapes where you are, where you might go. You're taught not to lie. You're taught not to do all the things that are easy if you are not around people that don't tell the truth or make up stories or whatever it might be. So, I think that the key to everything is faith.
Ralph Jr.'s his dad shares about faith. How has faith played a role in shaping your decision?
Well, there's absolutely no doubt that every time I'm confronted with a decision, I have to not only think about faith, but I also have to think about not disappointing my parents. Mm-hmm. And you just never know what kind of situation you're going to run into. And, when I was in college, I was a commuter student. So that always kept me honest because I had to come home every night. Came home most nights. Maybe one or two I didn't show up. But, I think that that's just part of that accountability with not wanting to disappoint, understanding the difference between right and wrong, and then just try to do your best to make the right decision whenever, and be careful about making decisions and think about things.
I can recall my parents telling me, you always tell the truth. If you tell the truth, you don't have to try to remember what you said, because it's the same thing over and over again. You tell the truth. I remember during the press conference when I was appointed development director for Columbus, one of the newspaper reporters asked me a question, and I told them that I will never tell them a lie. Never tell them a lie. I may not tell them everything I know, but I will not lie to them. And I think one should let that be the case in every instance, regardless of your circumstances, regardless of who you're talking.
Speaking of that, Ralph Sr., what does it look like to build something that lasts beyond your lifetime? What does that look like?
Well, there's one I'm sitting across the table. And three kids, that's three of the grandkids that will come. I've got the family tree laid out on the table over here. There are hundreds of names on there. And if you start at the top, that person never had in mind that all of those names would be a result of their interactions, their marriage, how they raise their kids. But I think that that's the main thing. Really understand how you fit in the scheme of things. You're just one little point. My legacy is going to be what Ralph does, Ralph Jr. does, what his kids do, what his grandkids do. Because I know one thing in my mind, if it were not for me and my wife, he wouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. And then they wouldn't be there to make the decisions that they make. Right. So that's a legacy to me.
Ralph Jr., as we think about legacy in the world today, how can men today be more intentional about leaving a legacy regardless of their platform or resources?
The first thought that comes to mind is to be present and, just let, my kids know that I'm going to be there for them. If something comes up, they actually tell me everything. And sometimes I say, hey, I don't need to know everything. But sometimes they tell me more than I want to know sometimes. But I think that hopefully is just an outcome of them knowing that we love them, that we have high expectations, but we understand things aren't always going to be perfect. The biggest lesson that I learned as a parent, besides time management, especially with twins, is patience. I am much more patient than I used to be, and I know just being patient with your kids to not put unreasonable expectations on them, knowing that, hey, they're going to find their own way, and you're going to be there to support them. And if they slip or whatever, you're there to help pick them up and not make them feel worse, but give them confidence, give them the best direction that you can. And of course, we all. If it were possible just to download all the critical information, we would never make mistakes. We would never have any issues. We have to go out and learn things for ourselves. So I do give my kids latitude to learn things on their own and also to maintain an open mind. We mentioned that earlier. Keeping an open mind and being able to make up your own decisions about certain things, I think is important, because otherwise you're just you can just end up cloning what you saw, and sometimes the reproduction isn't based on genuine belief and understanding.
Yeah, this is well, you guys have been great. I'm glad I got you two together at this table. As we come around the corner, this is a series about fatherhood. It's about fatherhood and passing that torch. So, Ralph Sr., we'll start with you. What would you say to a father who feels like he's behind or hasn't gotten it right yet? What words of encouragement would you give to that father?
By not having it right with
Yeah.
their offspring?
Yes.
There's only one thing that's final in life, and that's death. So you always have an opportunity to change, to make a difference when you make a mistake. You don't need to be embarrassed if you got to go back and clean up as a result of that mistake. Admit when you're wrong, press on when you're right.
Where sometimes we think that we messed up too bad, but us as believers, as Christians, we know that God just puts us back, going back out. I got you, got you. Be prayed up, and I got you, Rap Jr., what's your thought on that? What would you say to a father?
So the first thing about parenthood that I have come to understand is that we're like doctors. We're always practicing. No one has all the right answers. Doctors practice medicine. Parents practice parenthood, and you practice to try to get better. So the first thing is to say, hey, we do not always have it right. Sometimes the stars just line up in a certain way. So you're never behind as long as you look at it as practice and you keep yourself in a position where you can get better. But I think the other part is unconditional love, because, if there's love there, you're always going to end up at the right place. And love shows up by, showing up for your kids, give them the best insight that you can based on your understanding, as much as you're able to expose them to experiences. But it all comes down to love, in my opinion, because if your children know that you love them, then they're not going to give up.
We know that love covers a multitude of sins, And as I'm sitting across from two men who I know have that genuine love for each other. Not perfect men, but we know we serve a perfect God. We can always count on that good book, to bring us back.
Absolutely.
As I sit across from you guys, I think about the scripture. It says, train up a child in the way they should go. When they're old, they won't depart. And as we look at the legacy and what we built, but really what God has built, through this family. So this has been one of those conversations that reminds you, legacy isn't accidental, it's intentional. It's built in everyday moments, the values you live out, and the people you choose to invest in. To Ralph Smithers, Sr. and Jr., thank you for showing us what it looks like to not just build success, but to pass it on with purpose, with a plan. To everyone listening, here's the challenge. Don't just chase success, build something that outlives you. Pass the torch. If this episode added value to you, make sure you share it with someone who needs it, especially a father, mentor, or young leader. This is the Be a Baller podcast, and we look forward to we look forward to you listening to us next time. Rap Jr., Rap Sr., Rap Sr., Rap Jr. This has been a blessing to me. Thank you all for being on the show.
And thank you.
Thank you. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And what an honor to be with great men.
Yeah.
When's the last time you reviewed your financials with your banker? An annual checkup can help you strengthen cash flow, optimize loan structures, and plan for growth. A small review can lead to big opportunities. This Helping You Prosper tip is brought to you by First Merchants Bank, member FDIC.
Thank you for spending time with us here on Be a Baller podcast. Remember, legacy isn't built by accident. It's built through daily choices, faithful obedience, and intentional impact. If today's conversation encouraged you, challenged you, or spoke to your heart, share this episode with a friend, a teammate, a leader, or someone who's ready to live with purpose. That simple act of sharing helps us grow the movement and spread legacy-minded living. We want to invite you to join the legacy movement. This is more than a podcast. It's a call to action. And one of the best ways to go deeper is by grabbing your copy of the book, Living a Legacy. It's a powerful resource designed to help you apply what you're hearing and start building something that truly lasts. Until next time, keep showing up, keep pouring into others, and keep building a legacy worth following. Thanks for listening, and remember, be a baller. Live on purpose. leave a legacy.